What if everything you've been told about moving forward in life has been backward? What if the key to becoming who you're meant to be isn't about leaving your past behind, but about finally making peace with the most vulnerable version of yourself that still lives within you? What if the greatest psychological pioneer of our time discovered something so profound about human healing that it could revolutionize how you understand your own struggles, your patterns, and your untapped potential? Carl Jung spent his entire career studying the human psyche, but perhaps no discovery was more transformative than his understanding of what he called the eternal child within the adult. This wasn't just theoretical psychology for Jung, it was a lived reality that he observed in every patient, every relationship, and ultimately within himself. He understood that healing doesn't happen by transcending our childhood experiences, but by consciously integrating them. Jung once wrote, "The child is all that is abandoned and exposed, and at the same time divinely powerful." This paradox, the simultaneous vulnerability and power of our inner child, holds the secret to psychological wholeness that most people spend their entire lives searching for without ever finding, because they're looking in the wrong direction. They're trying to build a life by rejecting parts of themselves instead of reclaiming them. Modern neuroscience has validated what Jung intuited nearly a century ago. Research shows that childhood experiences literally sculpt the developing brain, creating neural pathways that continue to influence our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors decades later. Dr. Dan Siegel's work on interpersonal neurobiology demonstrates that the patterns formed in our earliest relationships become the template for how we relate to ourselves and others throughout life. But here's where Jung's approach becomes revolutionary. While many therapeutic approaches focus on changing problematic behaviors or thoughts, Jung understood that lasting transformation requires establishing a conscious relationship with the archetypal child that lives within our unconscious. This isn't about regression or dwelling in the past. It's about accessing the wisdom, creativity, and authentic vitality that we split off from ourselves in order to survive difficult circumstances. If you've ever wondered why certain situations trigger responses that seem bigger than the moment warrants, why success in the external world doesn't translate to inner fulfillment, or why you sometimes feel like you're living someone else's life instead of your own, then Jung's insights about healing the child within could provide the missing piece you've been searching for. Before we explore these life-changing discoveries that have transformed millions of lives around the world, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications if you're ready for psychological wisdom that goes beyond surface-level advice. This channel is dedicated to exploring the depths of human consciousness and the pathways to authentic transformation. Now let's discover what Carl Jung understood about the child within, and how his guidance can help you reclaim the parts of yourself that hold your greatest potential for joy, creativity, and genuine fulfillment. Jung's understanding of the inner child begins with his concept of psychological wholeness, or what he called the self with a capital S. For Jung, the self represents the totality of conscious and unconscious psychic contents, and the child archetype serves as the bridge between these different levels of awareness. The inner child isn't just a collection of childhood memories, it's a living, dynamic aspect of your current psychological functioning. This understanding emerged from Jung's own profound personal crisis in his late 30s, when he felt completely disconnected from his authentic nature despite his professional success. Through a process he later called active imagination, Jung began dialoguing with figures from his unconscious, including various child aspects of himself. This led to what he described as his most creative and psychologically fertile period, ultimately resulting in some of his most important theoretical contributions. Jung discovered that the inner child carries what he called the seeds of future development. Unlike the Freudian view that saw childhood primarily as the source of neurosis, Jung recognized that our earliest experiences also contain the blueprint for our unique creative potential. The child within holds our capacity for wonder, spontaneity, genuine emotion, and what Jung called the religious function, our innate drive toward meaning and transcendence. But Jung also understood that this archetypal child becomes wounded when our actual childhood environment fails to provide what he called adequate mirroring and containment. When children experience neglect, trauma, or emotional invalidation, they develop what Jung termed complexes, autonomous clusters of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that split off from conscious awareness and operate according to their own logic. These complexes aren't pathological, they're intelligent adaptations that serve protective functions. The child who experiences unpredictable parental moods might develop a hypervigilant complex that constantly scans for emotional danger. The child whose authentic expression was regularly criticized might create a perfectionist complex that tries to earn love through flawless performance. The child who felt emotionally abandoned might form an independent complex that refuses to show vulnerability or need. Jung's approach to healing these complexes differs radically from methods that try to eliminate problematic patterns. Instead, he advocated for what he called conscious relationship with autonomous aspects of the psyche. This involves recognizing when a complex has been activated, understanding its protective function, and gradually providing the safety and validation that the wounded child aspect never received. The process Jung described as individuation, the lifelong journey towards psychological wholeness, requires establishing conscious contact with the inner child, not as a regression, but as an integration. Modern attachment theory has validated Jung's insights, showing that adults who can access their childhood emotional experiences in a regulated way demonstrate greater resilience, creativity, and relational capacity. Jung's method of amplification becomes crucial for understanding how the inner child communicates. Amplification involves exploring the symbolic and mythological dimensions of personal experiences, recognizing that our individual stories connect to universal human themes. The adult who struggles with authority figures, for example, might amplify this pattern by exploring archetypal themes of rebellion, submission, and authentic power. This symbolic understanding transforms personal struggles from individual pathology into meaningful participation in universal human dramas. The inner child's fears and longings aren't just personal neuroses, they're expressions of fundamental human needs for safety, belonging, recognition, and authentic expression. This perspective reduces shame and increases compassion for our own psychological processes. Jung's concept of the transcendent function describes how consciousness evolves through the creative tension between opposing forces within the psyche. For inner child work, this often means holding space for the tension between our adult capabilities and our childlike vulnerabilities, between our desire for independence and our need for connection, between our rational understanding and our emotional truth. Rather than trying to resolve these tensions quickly, Jung encouraged what he called holding the opposites. This creates what modern psychology calls distress tolerance, the capacity to remain present with difficult or contradictory experiences without immediately trying to escape or fix them. This skill becomes essential for inner child healing, as it allows us to be with childhood pain without being overwhelmed by it. Jung's understanding of dreams provides another crucial pathway for connecting with the inner child. He observed that dreams often contain direct communications from wounded aspects of the psyche, offering both information about what needs healing and guidance about how to proceed. Child figures in dreams don't just represent past experiences, they often symbolize emerging potentials that are ready to be integrated into conscious life. Working with dreams requires what Jung called subjective interpretation, understanding all dream figures as aspects of the dreamer's own psyche rather than external people or situations. A dream about a frightened child might represent not just past trauma, but current aspects of the personality that feel threatened or unsupported. Learning to dialogue with these dream figures can provide ongoing guidance for the healing process. The creative dimension of Jung's approach recognizes that the inner child often communicates through nonverbal means: art, movement, play, and creative expression. Jung himself engaged in what he called creative elaboration of unconscious contents, creating mandalas, sculptures, and written dialogues with inner figures. This wasn't art therapy in the modern sense, but rather a method for giving form to psychological contents that couldn't be expressed through rational language alone. Modern expressive arts therapy has built on Jung's insights, demonstrating that creative expression can bypass psychological defenses and provide direct access to unconscious material. When adults allow themselves to create without judgment or performance pressure, they often spontaneously access the playfulness, curiosity, and authentic expression that characterized their childhood selves before adaptation became necessary. Jung's emphasis on the importance of ritual and symbol in psychological healing becomes particularly relevant for inner child work. Simple rituals creating space for play, honoring transitions, or marking important psychological shifts can provide the ceremonial container that helps facilitate deep healing. These rituals don't need to be elaborate. They just need to be meaningful to the individual and consistent enough to create psychological safety. The relational dimension of Jung's approach acknowledges that since childhood wounding often occurs in relationship, healing frequently requires what modern therapists call corrective emotional experiences in relationship as well. This doesn't necessarily mean returning to the relationships where harm occurred, but it does mean experiencing interactions that contradict the negative expectations formed in childhood. Jung's concept of psychological types also becomes relevant for inner child healing, as it helps individuals understand their unique psychological constitution and how it might have been impacted by childhood experiences. An introverted child in an extroverted family, for example, might have learned to suppress their natural need for solitude and reflection. Healing involves reclaiming these authentic aspects of temperament. The spiritual dimension of Jung's work recognizes that inner child healing often involves reconnecting with what he called the numinous experiences of wonder, meaning, and transcendence that children naturally access before they learn to edit their experience according to adult expectations. Many people find that as they heal their inner child, they naturally redevelop capacity for experiences of beauty, mystery, and connection that had been lost or suppressed. Jung's understanding of projection becomes crucial for adults healing their inner child wounds. Often, we unconsciously expect others to provide what we needed, but didn't receive in childhood. We might project parental transferences onto romantic partners, expecting them to heal our abandonment wounds, or we might project authority transferences onto bosses or teachers, expecting them to provide the validation we never received from our actual parents. The process of projection withdrawal involves gradually recognizing these expectations and taking responsibility for providing primary emotional care to our own inner child, rather than expecting others to do it for us. This doesn't mean becoming completely self-sufficient, but it does mean developing the capacity to self-soothe and self-validate, while also being able to receive appropriate support from others. Jung's method of confronting the complex involves deliberately engaging with activated psychological patterns rather than avoiding them. When we notice ourselves responding from a childlike place, hurt, defensive, or overwhelmed, we can use this as an opportunity to practice what Jung called conscious suffering. This means staying present with difficult emotions long enough to understand what they're communicating about our needs and wounds. This approach requires developing what modern psychology calls metacognition, the ability to observe our own mental processes. We learn to recognize when we're operating from a complex rather than from conscious choice, and we develop skills for relating to these states with curiosity rather than judgment. Part of me feels rejected and scared right now is very different from I am rejected and scared. The bodywork dimension of Jung's approach, while not as explicitly developed as in modern somatic therapies, was clearly present in his understanding of how psychological contents manifest physically. He observed that complexes don't just influence thoughts and emotions. They create specific patterns of muscular tension, breathing, and movement that can persist for decades after the original wounding occurred. Jung encouraged attention to these somatic manifestations, understanding that the body often holds wisdom about what's needed for healing. Modern trauma therapy has extensively developed Jung's insights, showing that healing from childhood trauma often requires working directly with the nervous system through breathwork, movement, and other body-based interventions. Jung's concept of compensation suggests that the psyche naturally attempts to balance conscious attitudes with unconscious corrections. An adult who has become overly rational and controlled, for example, might experience dreams, symptoms, or attractions that pull them toward their neglected emotional and intuitive sides. Understanding these compensatory movements helps individuals recognize what aspects of their childhood selves are trying to return to consciousness. The integration process that Jung described doesn't happen once and then remain static. It's an ongoing relationship that requires what he called daily attention to the unconscious. This might involve regular check-ins with your inner child, creative expression, dream work, or simply maintaining awareness of when childhood patterns are influencing current responses. Jung's understanding of individuation as a lifelong process means that inner child healing isn't something you complete and then move beyond. It's an ongoing aspect of psychological development that deepens and matures as you do. The 50-year-old's relationship with their inner child will be different from the 30-year-old's, but both are engaged in the same fundamental process of conscious integration. The collective dimension of Jung's work suggests that individual inner child healing serves broader cultural healing as well. When adults learn to treat their own vulnerability with respect and compassion, they become more capable of creating environments where children can develop authentically, rather than having to adapt to adult limitations and wounds. Jung believed that this kind of individual psychological work contributes to what he called the healing of the collective. Families, organizations, and societies benefit when individuals take responsibility for their own psychological development, rather than unconsciously perpetuating patterns of harm that originated in their own unhealed childhood experiences. The patience required for inner child healing cannot be overstated. Jung observed that psychological development follows organic rhythms that can't be forced or hurried. The aspects of ourselves that split off during childhood may need considerable time and consistent care before they feel safe enough to emerge from protection and begin expressing authentically again. This patience extends to accepting that inner child healing often happens in cycles rather than linear progression. There may be periods of rapid growth and integration, followed by times when old patterns resurface. These resurfaces aren't regression. They're often signs that deeper layers of healing are ready to be addressed, or that increased life stress is temporarily reactivating protective strategies. Jung's concept of psychological seasons suggests that just as nature has cycles of expansion and dormancy, the psyche has rhythms of opening and consolidation. During opening phases, there may be more capacity for exploring childhood material and integrating new insights. During consolidation phases, the focus might be on practicing new ways of being and strengthening gains that have already been made. The transformation that Jung described as the goal of individuation doesn't mean achieving some perfect state of mental health or eliminating all traces of childhood influence. It means developing a conscious, collaborative relationship with all aspects of your personality, including those that were formed in response to difficult circumstances. The goal is not to become someone who never experienced pain, but to become someone who can hold their pain with wisdom. Modern research on neuroplasticity validates Jung's belief that significant psychological change is possible throughout life. The brain's capacity to form new neural connections means that the patterns established in childhood, while influential, are not permanently fixed. Through conscious attention and appropriate practice, adults can literally rewire their brains to support new ways of thinking, feeling, and responding. Jung's emphasis on meaning-making becomes particularly important for adults healing childhood wounds. Often, the process involves not just working through past pain, but also discovering how those experiences, however difficult, contributed to the development of unique strengths, sensitivities, and capabilities. This doesn't mean glamorizing trauma or pretending that harmful experiences were beneficial, but it does mean finding ways to transform suffering into wisdom and service. Many people find that their deepest wounds become their greatest sources of compassion and their most powerful tools for helping others. The adult who healed their own abandonment issues might become particularly skilled at helping others feel seen and valued. The person who integrated their childhood hypervigilance might develop exceptional intuitive abilities for reading social situations and supporting others' emotional safety. Jung's understanding of the wounded healer archetype recognizes that those who have consciously integrated their own pain often become the most effective healers for others. This doesn't mean that everyone who experienced childhood trauma is destined to become a therapist, but it does suggest that personal healing work often naturally evolves into some form of service or contribution that helps others on similar journeys. The spiritual dimension of inner child healing often involves what Jung called the return of the religious attitude. This doesn't necessarily mean conventional religion, but rather the recovery of the natural sense of wonder, meaning, and connection that children experience before they learn to separate themselves from the mystery of existence. Many adults find that as they heal their inner child, they redevelop capacity for experiences of transcendence and meaning that had been lost. Jung observed that the inner child often serves as the bridge between personal psychology and what he called the collective unconscious, the deeper layers of human experience that connect us to universal themes and archetypal patterns. As we heal our personal childhood wounds, we often find ourselves more capable of participating consciously in the larger human story of growth, creativity, and spiritual development. The community aspect of inner child healing reflects Jung's understanding that psychological development serves not just individual well-being, but collective evolution as well. When people heal their own childhood wounds and learn to relate to themselves with compassion, they become more capable of creating healthy family systems, work environments, and social structures that support authentic human development. Jung believed that this kind of individual inner work contributes to the evolution of human consciousness itself. Each person who chooses conscious development over unconscious repetition of inherited patterns makes it slightly easier for others to make similar choices. This creates what modern systems theorists call positive feedback loops, where individual healing contributes to collective healing, which in turn supports more individual healing. For those who recognize aspects of their own journey in this exploration of inner child healing, Jung's ultimate message is one of profound hope and practical possibility. The wounds that seem so personal and limiting are actually universal human experiences that, when consciously engaged, can become gateways to greater compassion, wisdom, and authentic power. Your inner child isn't a problem to be solved or a weakness to be overcome. It's an aspect of your consciousness that holds essential keys to your wholeness. The vulnerabilities that you've been trying to hide or transcend may actually be the very qualities that, when properly integrated, become your greatest sources of creativity, empathy, and genuine strength. The healing journey Jung described doesn't promise to eliminate all difficulty or return you to some imagined state of childhood innocence. It promises something far more valuable, the development of consciousness that can meet whatever arises in life with presence, wisdom, and heart. This consciousness doesn't eliminate pain. It transforms pain into a teacher and ally rather than an enemy. As Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For those committed to inner child healing, this privilege unfolds through the daily choice to treat all aspects of yourself with curiosity rather than judgment, compassion rather than criticism, and patience rather than pressure. It's a journey that transforms not just your relationship with your past, but your entire experience of what it means to be fully, authentically human. Your inner child has been waiting not for perfection, but for presence. Not for someone to fix them, but for someone to finally see them as they truly are. Not broken or shameful, but wise and worthy of love exactly as they are. That someone is you, and the time is now.